Welcome to the Better Student Ministry podcast, where we take a deep dive into practical youth ministry topics to help you and your team become better at what God has called you to do. We're joined now by your hosts, Mark and Jared, who together have over 30 years of youth ministry experience.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Better Student Ministry podcast. My name's Jared.
And I'm Mark.
Good to be back. We got a real special guest here today, Mark.
Yeah, very thankful. This is an individual I just met recently, but we became best friends.
That's
behind
your back. He said some stuff I didn't want to tell you, but
that's okay.
Come on.
No, he's a great friend of mine. I've known him for a while, and Mark and I recently got to spend some time, and you got to meet him for the first time. And I don't want to say three amigos to describe us, but that's kind of accurate.
Yep.
There you go.
Yeah.
I like it.
Anyway, we got our guest here. His name is Heath McCoy, and Heath serves as the District Youth Director for Southern New England and the Assemblies of God, and has the opportunity of serving and helping oversee a lot of churches in their youth ministries, among other things that he does. And he's been in ministry for a really long time, serves in a lot of capacities, has a lot of experience leading leaders, and experience in youth ministry. And so we're excited to have him on the podcast today and talk about a topic that I think is really important.
Yeah, so Heath, thanks so much for spending some time here with us. One of the things we'd love to get some insight from you on as we're kind of navigating through this season we've just been through, and I don't know when our listeners are listening, so the cool thing is this concept is something that's going to apply actually through many seasons of our ministries. But as we're trying to get things started back up, so whether you've just come through a pandemic, or whether maybe you took a break during summer, or maybe there's just been some big transition in your church or amongst your youth staff, we find ourselves as leaders in seasons where there's some momentum that has been lost with your team. Maybe some of the team has scattered a little bit. Maybe you've added some new people to your team. Help us think through and talk through, what does it look like to re-engage, to work together, to bring this team together so that as you move forward in serving, you're as efficient and gelling as well as you can as a team. If you could give us some insight as to what does it look like to bring a team together that may be in a season of disconnect?
Absolutely. Thank you. First of all, thank you guys for the invite to be a part of this podcast. I love to be a part of what's going on beyond just our own little circle here in Southern England. So it's an honor to be a part of beyond New York, which I'm sure this podcast is reaching. I think many times there's so many elements of leadership or specifically, building a team that are really kind of put us in some that we can draw and put together. But I'm just going to speak to my personal experiences. Like Jared mentioned, I've been in youth ministry for a lot of years, and youth pastored for over 12 years in Ohio before moving into New England, and had the opportunity to influence future church leaders and then come to the district office. And so I've seen a lot of different things, and there's a lot of elements that work to building teams. But I just want to talk today on this podcast, just one specific element that really has been important and been influential to me and what I've seen really work. And so if you have leaders at this time that maybe you're like, how do I engage them? Or maybe you have leaders, as it was mentioned, that are on the fringe, or they're 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Or maybe you're constantly evaluating your team and you're like, okay, I'm at a place now where I need to recalibrate my interaction with my team. And so if I could just give one big word that I think really could help you, is in the area of collaboration. And I think I find in student ministries all the time is like, we start a ministry, or we're in student ministries, and we're either asking for leaders to come and help. And, again, you may be listening at a different time, but right now, many of our leaders have scattered in this particular day and age we're in, but maybe you're experiencing that again. We're at the time you listen to this podcast. And one of the things that I'm hearing out there from every leader is like, hey, I've got to pull a team back together, or how do I build this team? How do I put people together? And collaboration to me is probably at the top of the list of, okay, how do we engage our leaders? How do we make them feel like they're a part of this? And so let me just say this. I think the collaboration piece is simply many times leaders come to us and they go, what would you like me to do? And so we as youth pastors or leaders, we feel like, okay, I've got to create a to-do list. And for me, let me just say this, I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this, but I feel like as a leader and as a youth pastor, those times, it was actually more work for me to feel like, okay, I got to create a to-do list for every leader that I have. Like it was just time consuming. Like, you know what I mean? Like, okay,
yeah, a lot of times you're like, I could just get this done quicker if I just did it myself, right? I know what I want. I know the quality that I want. Yeah, but that's a short circuit, right?
Absolutely. And so you're spending half your day just going, okay, I've got, X amount of leaders. I got to create something for each one of them to do. Where I feel like if you could foster a culture of collaboration, it's almost like they know what they're there to do. And here's the key. If there's one key you walk away, collaboration allows you to get to find someone's giftings. It allows you to find their passions because you're collaborating together on particular projects or the big picture. And so you're learning about them, like what makes them tick, what would they be happy doing, versus a lot of times, again, leaders come to us and say, hey, I want to be a part of your team. And then a lot of times the first question is, well, what would you like me to do? I'm going to be on a certain youth ministry, and what would you like me to do? And we're just kind of like, and you kind of find yourself like, now I got to create a position and I got to create a job. And a lot of times we lose leaders because they feel like, well, I don't really have a part. I'm not really a part of this. But a collaboration does that. And here's the big thing. I'll just talk from my own experience. So I came to a church in Ohio. It was a large church. It was well over 1,000 people. My first Wednesday at this youth group, I think they had like 67 kids. So if you know anything about statistics and numbers, you probably should be at least 10% of your church. Your youth ministry should probably be at least 10% of your church size. So I go in there, and so we're not even at our 10%. By the following Wednesday, we were down to like 56. So like 10 left that were there just to check out the new guy between the 2 weeks. And so, man, I kept trying to figure out, they had a great team. They had a great setup. They had great equipment. I mean, they had all the tangibles. But I was like, what is it that is keeping this youth ministry from really going to the next level? And really, I feel like obviously it was a God thing, but really what we began to put our hands on is we realized is that it was kind of like what you call a small front door, but a really big back door. So people are coming in, but then they're just leaving the big back door, and then there's no life to it. And what I began to do is say, okay, let's pull this team together. Everyone just kind of floating, nothing specific. And we began to fire leaders that were in the wrong seats on the bus, and we began to replace people, and we began to say, okay, you're going to mentor students, but we did all this. We sat down and said, let's collaborate. So once a week, we would get down with our team, and it wasn't mandatory, but a lot of the teams would be a part of that. And we would collaborate on what do we want to see this Wednesday night? What is Pastor Heath going to be talking about? And even students got involved in that. And once we begin to foster this culture of collaboration, what happens is the biggest things is these leaders begin to own it. Because a lot of times the church is asking you, the senior pastor or whoever, they're asking you to own it. And that's a lot. But when you can get your team to own it, where it's not just yours, you all own it together. When you own something, you don't walk past a piece of paper without picking it up. But when you don't own it, you just walk past that piece, but you don't care. And so what we begin to see is that as we begin to collaborate together, the relationships were building, the trust was building, and they begin to own it. And once we begin to own it, true story, we went from 56 that within probably less than 6 months, our youth ministry was over 320 in attendance. And I go back to why this subject is so passionate and important to me on this collaboration, because I really feel like that was the component that changed the course of the growth of our youth ministry.
That's good.
Because our leaders no longer just showed up and said, well, I'm here. I've always said this, but man, you can find anyone to drive a van to youth convention. You can find, anybody to show up at a specific event and say, hey, we need you to cook hamburgers today. But to get people to say, hey, no, I'm a part of this. I own it. It's mine. You're only going to do that when you fostered this culture of collaboration and relationship and trust.
That's good. And in a moment here, we want to get into some more specific details to that. But as we lay this foundation, Heath, I'm wondering if you could help us. Maybe it's establishing a little bit of a definition, or at least a similar language. Help our listeners The primary listeners probably to this podcast are main point leaders, though we probably do have other volunteers leaders that listen as well. But if you just take a quick moment here to speak to the main point leader, help us to differentiate or understand the difference between what does it mean to lead in collaboration versus having your team kind of do your job that has the potential to create some resentment in your team where you're like, man, I feel like we're doing all the work here. They just show up and, they smile at all the kids and they talk on a, large group meeting night, or because I do think that there is a differentiation between the two. So based on your experience or maybe your wisdom or knowledge here, help us to understand what is collaboration, what is it not, and how is that different from just unloading all of your responsibilities? How do you lead through collaboration?
Yeah, great question. First of all, I'd say let's just get that on the table. Collaboration is not a job description. Collaboration doesn't mean, okay, I've given this particular leader, here's your job description, and this is what you do on a Wednesday night. Now, down the road, does collaboration allow for that? Absolutely. It allows people to, again, define their passions and their giftings, and they begin to work in those areas. But collaboration to me is, in a sense, is letting, as a key leader, it's letting your guard down. You're letting people into your inner circle. You're letting people into your mind, what you're thinking, where you're going, and you're asking them to come along and be a part of that. But part of that is allowing them to have influence into decisions, to be a part of the decision-making process. Obviously, there's things that obviously you as the key point leader, you have to make those decisions, but allowing them to be a part of the decision-making process, to allow them to be part of the development of what your overall goals, your roles, all that's going to look like. It's building that relational trust that comes along with it. It's facilitating relationship. And we all know that once you build that relationship, and it really, it's like a family. You're not always going to, I used to always tell my team, you can disagree with my head, just don't disagree with my heart. Because my head is not always going to be right. So that's where we will say, hey, come on, let's collaborate with my head. But you don't always disagree with my heart, because at the end of the day, my heart was, to see our youth ministry grow, to impact our community, to see our church, all, lifelong followers of Christ. So I think part of the collaboration thing is, and I would say this too, another great thought along with that is collaboration allows you to set expectations. Hey, here's what I expect of you as a leader, but here's what you can expect of me as the core leader. And so I'm not going to necessarily ask you to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. So in a lot of ways, it's the big key of collaboration. What if there's anything that collaboration does, and what you should be fostering is just this culture of trust. Collaboration says, I trust you, you trust me, and that we're really in this together. It's not a top-down. Collaboration doesn't necessarily allow for top-down leadership. Again, the decisions it's ultimately going to fall on you as a leader. We all know that. As the point leader, the ultimate yes or no is going to fall on you. But people want to feel like, hey, well, I have some buy-in to this. I have some thought. I have an open door to come in and sit and talk about, hey, here's some of my thoughts. Here's some of my passions. Here's what we could collaborate on and do together. So for you as a key leader, I think it's just facilitating a culture and a climate where you can sit down together and you can say, hey, let's build this as a team. And then by building it together, like I said, everyone feels like they have ownership. I heard, I know you guys have probably been over talked, but one of the key examples where you see some of this is I heard someone say, how many janitors or how many maintenance people does Disney World employ? And someone came up with some number, I'm sure it's like 1,000 or whatever. And the true answer was like, well, it was like 67,000 janitors. They're like, what? And they said, well, because from the CEO down to Mickey Mouse, nobody walks past a piece of trash without picking it up.
Yeah.
And so everyone, is a maintenance person. Everyone is a janitor. And again, that's the kind of culture you want to create, is not like, well, I'm the key leader, so I don't have to do certain things and you do. But collaboration says, hey, we're kind of in this together. We're facilitating this together.
I love that. I love that idea, Heath, too, because it creates mutual accountability.
Yep.
So you're not the guy running around or the girl running around constantly yelling at everybody or telling everybody, hey, you're not doing this. You're not doing this. Like when there's ownership across a team, people are doing that for each other. You're raising the culture in your group to create mutual accountability, mutual understanding, hey, this is not something that was dictated to us, but this is what we all agreed upon, right? Like this is our thing.
Exactly.
I'm interested to dive a little more specifically into. So let's say a youth pastor or a team is listening to this and they say, I want to do that. I want to create that environment. What does that look like for you in your setting practically? Is that, you mentioned once a week meetings, one-on-ones. Like for you, what advice would you give as far as practically being able to pull this off and create a more collaborative culture in your youth ministry?
Yeah, the good thing is, I'll start from my own experience. I mean, a couple of years ago, like we instituted, hey, we're going to have a once a week, and it was an evening thing where we would sit around a big board table at our church. Anyone who wanted to be a part of that could be a part. We didn't mandate it. We didn't, but we found that a lot of people wanted to be a part of it, where we would just sit around the table and say, okay, what do we want next week's service to look like? What are, you guys have probably experienced it. Maybe the key leaders have is like, when you're sitting down developing, a lot of times the youth pastor's sitting at a desk or Googling, games for youth group, or things like that. Well, we just said, hey, we're going to talk about what kind of games do we want to do? What kind of openers do we want to do? And we just felt like the best ideas were in the room versus one person having to come up with that and then tasking it out, which is usually what we do in youth. A lot of times we do in youth ministry. One person comes up with the idea and then they task it out. Whereas if we sat down together on a Tuesday night and we said, okay, what do we want A to Z to look like? What do we want worship to like? Hey, here's what I'm speaking on. Here's what I'm thinking I'm going to speak on next week. Do you have any, what's some ideas you guys might have to make that impactful? What object lessons? So it was just intentional. Now, I would say this, in today's culture, that's even more attainable because you don't necessarily have to, you could do that over a Zoom meeting nowadays. You could collaborate over a Zoom meeting without everyone having to physically come to the church. So, we didn't even have Zoom when we were doing that. And I just thought, today you could probably even get more involvement if you were intentional, say, hey, we're going to do, and then invite students to that too. Don't make it just a leader thing. But I think you get a huge wide net when you do it that way. So, I mean, that was definitely a practical thing to do. You just set aside a time where we're going to get together and we're going to talk about these things. The other thing practically is, if you feel like you can't do that, just all through your own connection emails or whatever, you just shoot out some ideas. Say, here's some thoughts of what I'd like to see happen. What do you guys think? Here's what we're going through. On a practical level, Jared, too, I would say, and this is really, I think, really important when it comes to collaboration, is don't be afraid as the leader, as the key point leader, to share information and resources. Because if you're sharing information, first of all, that again builds collaboration. They can be a part of that. So like if I came across good articles, you should be sharing those articles with your team. Or if you're coming across some ideas, you share those ideas with your teams or resources so that they feel like they're part and they can speak to it. So again, that's why I'm saying if you have a sermon that you're coming up with or a topic you really want to deal with, man, if you collaborate together, you're going to get so many more creative ideas that's going to totally blow you away. So that would be a practical way. Is just if I was you, maybe even in your own youth ministry, in your church or wherever you're at, you could create just as simple as, man, this is going to be an old term, and I hate to even say this in our digital age, but I think it makes our leaders feel important. If you create they have their own little mailbox. Whether it's in your office or in a certain room where, Jared Berry goes weekly, and maybe you as the key point leader have just placed some information in that box that they just grab. And so it gives them something tangible to say, oh man, okay. Or, Pastor Heath needs me to do this week, or he's asking for my ideas on this. And it's just tangible. Again, I know we can accomplish that through text, and we can accomplish that through different types of media, but what a great tangible way just to feel like when I come to church, I go somewhere, I check something, and there's something there for me.
Yeah, that's
good. So, and
it struck me, Heath, as you're sharing, there's a lot of probably practical ways we can do this, whether it's a monthly staff meeting or one-on-ones weekly, or like some of the ideas that you're sharing right now. And I think those are all phenomenal. But as I heard you sharing, you're talking about the sharing ideas and asking people their input. It struck me as you can, as a leader, you can say, I want a collaborative environment and I'm going to create a time to facilitate that. But there has to be certain leadership attributes about you as a leader that make that environment actually possible, right? Like you were alluding to the idea, I don't know that you use this language, but this is what I was thinking of as you're sharing, like you have to be vulnerable, maybe humble as a leader to, you talked about sharing. And I was thinking in my perspective, like I remember as a leader going to and sharing our failures, saying, sharing like, guys, man, I'm seeing this in our youth ministry. I don't know where to go from here. What do you guys think? So as you think through, what do leaders need? What sort of characteristics do you need? Does it require for you to have in order to create a collaborative environment?
Well, first of all, I would say that you don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to approach. Don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to develop. I think sometimes we get in that mindset of like, well, our leaders are really busy. Our leaders have, other tasks in their lives. And so sometimes that's the fallback for us as leaders. Like, well, I don't want to give too much and I don't want to do that. I think that you got to kind of erase that mindset, because I think, yes, it's probably true in a lot of ways. But if we carry that around in our mind as leaders, it's going to cause us to always hesitate to act. Like we're always going to have the reins of the horse pulled a little tight, because in our minds, we're always like, well, I don't want to overdo them, or what if I lose them, or what, because that's how our minds work. And then we find next thing you know, we're doing everything ourselves. Yeah. So I'm just saying, man, just don't be afraid to act. You put it out there and say, here's what we're going to do. Or don't be afraid to ask those questions and those tough questions. Again, like you mentioned it now, for me, I place clear expectations upon our team. Like I think if you, and I don't mean to venture off the collaborative thing, but I just think if you're not there on a whatever night you meet, on a consistent basis, then are you really part of the team? And so, there has to be expectations like, hey, look, we need you here, and after so many times, if you choose not to be here, then we're just going to consider you're not part of the team. But I think you can't be afraid to ask. And you kind of mentioned it too, is you can't be afraid to be vulnerable and say, listen, I don't have the answers to this. I don't know. And then I think another thing that fosters collaboration as the key leader, just like you said, practical, is yes, you're pastor in the youth ministry, but don't be afraid to be the pastor of this team too. So don't be afraid to say, hey, before we even talk, let me just share what God's been speaking to me. Sometimes we like to hide that to ourselves, or, but don't be afraid, be vulnerable, say, hey, here's what God's been sharing in my heart. I want to share with you guys. And here's some areas I've been struggling with. I heard someone say a long time, we should wear, as leaders, we need to wear our scars with class. Doesn't mean you just go out, and you just, you share everything. Here's what I'm struggling with, and you're just totally open. But you can wear your scars with class. You can say, here's some things I'm struggling with. And I think it creates such a collaborative environment when you as a leader are willing to be vulnerable and share those particular things. So I think those are some key things, right? Just being willing to say, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to place expectations. Those create collaboration. Don't be afraid to eventually assign, and say, hey, look, I'd like to see you, Jared, are you willing to take on this particular area? Man, I've listened to you talk as we built this relationship and as we built trust with one another. Because I think ultimately that's what our leaders are looking for. They want to feel valued. Collaboration is going to add that. They want to feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves. Collaboration is hopefully going to foster that. They want to feel like they're trusted, like that they don't have to be babysitted or being told what to do. So collaboration is going to foster that. Those are the kind of things.
That's so different than just handing me a task, right? Sure. It feels so different.
Yeah, that's good.
And then I would say that back on us as team, as the key leader, and I like that verbiage that was used, but back on us, it's going to cause us but we need to be detailed in what we're doing. Like the minute we come across kind of scattered, or the minute we feel like, we're trying to collaborate, but like collaboration doesn't mean that the key leader doesn't know what they're doing.
Yeah, it's good. I think sometimes we can sit down at the table and we think we're being collaborative, and we're like, all right, guys, we've got our big youth event coming up. What should we do? Like in your head, you're like, I'm trying to be collaborative. Give me your ideas. But
Exactly.
that's very different than, okay, here's our specific focus that we want to execute. Who has some ideas for this element? Like it's important to realize, you're the key leader. You've got to help lead. Like you gave the kind of the metaphor earlier of the family, right? At the end of the day, there's still mom and dad who oversees the family, but all the decisions we make go into making a healthy.
And a lot of
family.
it too depends right on the team you have, right? Because sometimes you got a team that's super filled with idea people, and it's you light the match barely, and the fire goes, and then other times it's like, anybody got any ideas? And it's cricket, cricket.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's important, is that that's what I say is, you're exactly right. Collaboration doesn't mean that you as leader don't have it figured out. Don't come to the table and say, well, I don't know what we're doing.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And the collaboration will help you figure that out. I feel like, you gotta have the outline. You've got to have the foundation. Collaboration just allows you to add fruit to the tree.
That's good.
And because like I said, again, you're right. At the end of the day, every idea could just be like, well, those were great, but there's no way those are going to work. And that's going to happen. Or there may be no ideas, and it's still going to fall back on you as the key leader. Yeah. I always said to our leaders too, like, you guys have been doing this, but when the kid goes to the hotel room and jumps on the bed and goes through the drywall, they're not going to the parents aren't going, or the pastor's not going to the chaperone to ask what happened. They're going to go to you, and they're going to sit down with you. So at the end of the day, yes, you as the leader, you hold the keys. You are the foundation to. So you're right. Be detailed. Like, I'll just say this one last thing. Like, I'm not, my personality, I'm a big picture creative. I'm not a detail person. And I realize, and this is where collaboration helps you too. So when you're collaborating, make sure that you fill that table with people who are not just like you.
Yeah, it's good.
Because if they're all big picture creative people, I guarantee you're going to have great ideas, but nothing's going to get done.
Sure.
And so collaboration is filling that table with people who offset your giftings and where you line up. But like, I would have leaders on my team that we collaborate with, and I would say, hey, Dave, we talked about doing this skit for our message, and so can you help put that together? You've heard the discussion, and Dave would say, well, what time do you want us to come out, and what should we be wearing? How many people should I use? And I'm like, dude, you're killing me here. I don't care. This is too many details for me. You're a detail person. You just do it, But what I learned from that is, like, he needs that from me. Like, he needs me to be a detailed, even though we're collaborating together, I still got to show up to the table with some of the details, and I can't just have everything with blanks. There has to be, some of the blanks have to be filled in.
Yeah, there's no better way to, and this was totally my personality too. There's no better way to kill momentum for a great idea than to be just a big picture leader that don't have people around you that can help you execute it, right? Exactly. And they're just like, okay, great idea. This will probably never happen though, right? Hey,
and that's what I would say again with what collaboration does. Going back to what we said early, is it allows those passions and those giftings to rise to the top. So you get to see, oh, this is who that person is. This is where they fit best, that type of thing.
Yeah. Hey, as we get ready to wrap up here, I got another question for you. It's kind of a lateral step as it relates to collaboration, but I'm curious in your years of either personal youth ministry or groups that you've been connected with in your role currently, have you seen some really good or creative ways to also bring students into that collaborative process? How to get them, like, just as important as it is to get your leaders on board, there's probably some key students too, or any student that's interested, to also feel like they're a part of something bigger than just, I'm here to receive for me. So I'm curious if there was like 2 or 3 ideas that stuck out in your mind that you're like, oh man, here was a group, or here was something that we tried that really knocked it out of the park as it related to getting our students in on hearing their voice or participating in something bigger.
Yeah, it's so good. I heard recently, someone say to me, we all know with the current Gen Z, and they're producers, they're passionate. They're not always into the details, but they're more into how they feel. And what someone said to me, it's just resonating recently, is like, those are all good attributes. We want them to be producers. We want them to be passionate. We want all those things, but yet they're still students, and they need leadership.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like our as leaders, we should squash those things. We want all those things, but then we also need to add leadership to those things. That's where I feel like God can help us with fostering, so that we see them, grow and that type of thing. So, a couple of things I think that can maybe answer that question best from my own experience and what I've seen is, first of all, I just always had a mindset that every student is one step away from greatness. And that helps me keep a perspective, like even for the kids who maybe aren't, your favorites at the time, or they're not always engaged the way you'd want to be. And I just say, first of all, I'm going to put these lens on that says that every student's one step away from greatness. And so we would just me personally, I just try to identify traits in them that are good. And again, going back to not afraid to just call it out and say, hey, I see this in you. Would you be willing to help me with this? Like, you just specifically ask them. And a lot of times that's such an empowering thing, just to feel like, one, you asked them, two, you weren't afraid to give them that task or say, hey, come alongside, journey with me on this. And I've seen students rise to the top, from that. I always learned, like, I was never going to be the best video editor and all those things, but these students could figure it out. And so I was just not afraid to say, hey man, I need your help. Can you help me with this? And because the same thing goes with them. I think students want to feel valued. They want to feel a part. They want to feel like they own it, all those types of things. So I was never afraid to say, just come right out and say, and ask. And then ultimately, I think I would just encourage you as leaders, don't be afraid to give students, like, you guys ever notice this in youth ministry? You could preach the greatest message. Like, you as a youth leader, you'll preach the greatest message, man. You're like, every kid's are going to fly to the altar, and maybe don't get no response. But then a student stands up and he just says 2 words like, Jesus loves you, or this is what happened at school today. And then the kids are flying to the altar and they're crying and they're whining. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, I just preached this great message and you didn't respond at all. But this student gets up and says 3 words and everyone's ready to, give their heart to Jesus. I think I've just learned that, their peers just hold such power and weight with their peers. And so don't be afraid. Here's what I'd say. Don't be afraid to give your students a platform. Just don't be afraid to give them a platform. Give them an opportunity to speak. Give them the opportunity to share. Give them that, hey, tonight this is your assignment. And I've learned too that, maybe they're not at the time anyway, the greatest guitar players, but they're getting there. It's not always about the best music. Sometimes you could have the greatest young adult up there playing guitar and they're masterful, but you throw a student up there who's not near as good, and students will still respond to that better than they would respond the other way. So just, I think sometimes we're looking in this midst of using students who have it all together. We're looking for students who just rise to the top and they're there, but maybe not be afraid to call out students who you see potential in. And once you place that value on them, I believe many of them will live up to it.
That's good. It's so interesting because I literally just had this conversation with Jared yesterday. It appears as though he did the opposite in his youth ministry, where he told me he had a student who was like, I want to be a youth pastor. And Jared said to him, yeah, a lot of people say they want to do that, but not a whole lot follow through.
Well, you guys should know that young man is in ministry today. So looks like the Lord knew what he was doing.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the
nothing
one that
like
got away.
spite being the motivator to get into ministry.
Sometimes you got to tell a kid he can't do it so that he will want to do it. Yeah. Hey Heath, man, this has been so good, and I really I'm thankful for the wisdom God's given you in sharing this today. And I was just, as you were sharing, I was just saying, can you imagine what it would look like if our youth ministries were filled with adult leaders and student leaders who felt such a collaborative environment that they owned that youth ministry, that they felt that it was theirs and they were part of the mission of God. I mean, we would see some amazing things. So thanks for being with us, man, and sharing your heart with us. And if you're listening, you're a leader, and we want to encourage you to start creating that environment, start being a part of that, and encourage others to do the same. So thanks so much, guys. This is Better Student Ministry. We'll see you on the next one. Peace.
Peace.
Thanks so much for listening to the Better Student Ministry podcast. If you enjoyed today's content, be sure to check out our 10-minute training videos and discussion guide for you and your team. You can find those on YouTube and Facebook by searching Better Student Ministry. Be sure to give us a 5-star rating, subscribe, and let us know in the comments what topics you would like covered. You can also email us at betterstudentministry@gmail.com.